Up next, I would like to introduce the second panel in our digitalization segment on the topic of unlocking data to build data-driven business models. The panel will be moderated by Nikolai Martyniuk, who is the CEO and co-founder at WePower. And he'll be joined by such gentlemen as Harnish, Jain, who is the partner and director at BCG Digital Ventures, as well as Florian Kolb, who is the chief commercial officer and general manager at Intertrust Technologies Corporation. So, gentlemen, Harnish, Florian, are you with us today?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our hopefully very interesting talk about unlocking data to build data-driven businesses. Hello, Florian. Hello, Harnish. How are you today?
Hi, good morning.
Hey, Nikolai. How are you?
Awesome. We're back. Cool. Great. How are you this morning? Thanks for waking up early.
Good morning. Yes, good morning from Los Angeles, and greetings to everyone around the globe. Thanks for having me.
Okay, guys, maybe then let's start with intros first. What do you do and what is the focus of the company? Maybe, Florian, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. So greetings from the Bay Area, Palo Alto, 6 o'clock in the morning. So Intertrust is a data technology company, and we are co-owned by two utilities. One of the utilities is one of your main sponsor called E.ON, you're well aware. The other utility is Origin Energy from Australia. And additional shareholders from other verticals are Philips from the healthcare space, Sony and Panasonic from media and entertainment, as well as a large Silicon Valley, Japan-based venture fund called World Innovation Lab. And I'm the commercial officer and general manager for the energy.
Thank you, Florian. Harnish, could you just briefly talk about yourself and about Boston Consulting Group Ventures?
Yeah, thank you for having me again. I'm from Los Angeles. Johnny, I'm partner director at BCG Digital Ventures. It's part of the Boston Consulting Group. Our focus is to help build businesses by innovating, launching, scaling them, or accelerating existing businesses with corporations, with the intent of having them think like VCs and operate like startups, either to launch adjacent businesses outside the core or optimize the core business. And for me, the role is really about serving cross-disciplinary teams with clients to sort of launch the industry-first disruptions, help them navigate the fuzzy front of innovation, or providing equal rigor to operationalize the core business for large-scale transformations.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's dive then into our today's topic. Data became probably one of the most important drivers for innovation today. Some call data as a new oil, and utilities and large corporations have a very large chunk of the data, which is quite siloed. But if used properly and with enough drive and push, it can accelerate the innovation tenfold. So on this topic, Harnish, you started BCG Digital Ventures in 2014 with the thesis that corporations will own the next horizon of innovation. So my question is whether it's still true today, 6 years later, and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. The hypothesis started with the fact that, the innovator's dilemma, companies would probably not try to cannibalize themselves. But however, we believe that corporations have amazing strategic assets, which, entrepreneurs would die for. I've been on that other side where they have access to infrastructure, to customers, data about the overall market, the industry know-how, IP, and data itself, both internal operations, but also about their ecosystem partners and the customers too. So that if you combine that with the attacker mindset and the whole fearless reinvention and agile ways of working of a startup, we can create advantage businesses. So that hypothesis in a way still stays true. But what has evolved is for B2B sectors like energy and industrial goods, which are relatively slow moving and a bit more risk averse, they are trying to also understand how I can take the same principles, either launch adjacent businesses, but really apply that same way of working for the internal business and really optimize their core businesses. So our portfolio, although initially was a lot of new growth adjacent businesses, now it's a healthy balance of doing both digital transformations in the core while also having to figure out. Although I would say the interesting thing is for startups, because this is an amazing space, especially enterprise grade solutions and startups. That's different than B2C, because you really need to understand the customers and how your solution will work. And that deep industry know-how creates an advantage for both the startups. So we feel we are a conduit between both of them. And I think that's how things are really evolving.
Thanks. Thanks, Harnish. Florian, having vast experience in your previous role as being part of the innovation team, do you agree with with Harnish? And what was your key takeaway lessons during the past 5 years as well? What is the most important ingredient in utilities in this space to be successful for a utility?
Yeah, so I worked for the last 15 years on the utility side, and the last 5 years here based in Silicon Valley on the innovation side. And I think I agree. I mean, one of the issues that I saw is that corporate innovation within a big organization is probably one of the most challenging tasks that you can find in a corporate. So I worked in many different functions, in M&A and in the operations. And, we have to ask ourselves, why is this the case? And what are the root causes? And I think, to mention a couple, the objectives are often unclear. Of course, there are a lot of corporate antibodies. There's a lot of innovation theater going on on the corporate side, which makes it very difficult. And on the other hand, it's also one of the most tasks that you can have, because creating something new and successful is great, and it's just a very, very good feeling. And I know what I'm talking about, because I claim that I've created new things that are still exist. So this is the environment that you're facing, and of course they own a lot of assets and they have a lot of potential. So the big question is, how do you unlock that? And I don't think there's a silver bullet to this, but you need like a really quite extensive set of activities and techniques. And one of the challenging things is that every corporate or utility is different. So what works with company A doesn't necessarily work with company B. So it's really trying to find out what's the best technique to apply to actually unlock the potential that definitely is there. And you also have to accept the fact that maybe in 80 or 90% this unlocking fails.
Interesting. Florian, one more question to you then. You were part of the utility innovation in energy for 5 years, as you mentioned. And now you joined a scale-up, a company that is closely working with utilities, and you're pushing the data-driven business model even further. Having a good understanding of how large utility internals work, for the startups out there, what are the key drivers for utilities to act and move forward?
Yeah, so that's also a good question. So, I mean, per definition, I think it's hard for utilities to move. I mean, that's, the reason is just the nature of the business model. It's a partly regulated business model. It has pretty long investment cycles. So that's, I think, the underlying assumption. And I know that you are very familiar with the Free Electrons program,
Yep.
which I actually started in 2017. And the reason why I did that together with many, many other colleagues from the industry was because it is so hard. And I think the promise is that, on the other side of all the hardship, huge opportunities wait. And there's a big reward because it's a very large business. It has many innovation challenges, and it's also at the end receptive to acquire new technologies. And I think what's really important to keep pushing, to be very patient, to avoid innovation theater as much as possible, and also understand your customer. And that sounds like okay, that's not something very scientific, but to do really a proper stakeholder mapping within the utility partner that you work with, so to understand, what are the different groups that influence the decision making, where is the power, and where is the key sponsor, and if you map that out and try to manage that. I think what doesn't really work, especially if you have like new technologies, is you put up a website, people find you, and then swipe the credit card, download your software, and you're off to the races. Yeah, I mean that's more or less. I don't know if you are aware, but we had like this Snowflake IPO last week, and that's the business model they were able to pull up within like 8 years or so. But I think if you look to their customer base, then it's like tech-savvy customers that are in the digital space, and that's not really a utility.
Thank you. Harnish, utilities and large corporations do not move fast in innovation, and typically they innovate through M&A. From your perspective, how hard is it for you to put a large corporation on a path to transform and keep them on that course?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a good topic segue, kind of what Florian remarked on. I often say this, that, innovation is fuzzy in the start, it's messy in the middle, and it's beautiful in the end. And everyone wants this beautiful piece yesterday. So one part they think is like, I'll just quickly go and do an acquisition or a merger for a company or a startup. However, we have to be very aware, like, what are the due diligence criteria you're thinking about? Are you just thinking about technology and deploying it? What happens to the culture of the team? Because they often get stifled, in a large corporation. It almost feels like you have 1,000 different initiatives going on, but none of them are really cohesively stitched together. And then ultimately, even if it's even a data-driven startup, have you really gone through the OODA loop and understood what the key ways of working are? Because it really requires a cultural change of integrating the standard operating procedures. And as Florian was rightly remarking, the user, which might be somebody, in the field force, is very different than the customer and the one who is recommending it and influencing it. So what we've seen work with large corporations, number one, that innovation has to be a C-suite mandate. It has to come all the way down from the CEO. It is a messy process, but we have to be part of that to make sure you're touching every single touch point, both operations as well as the strategic piece. And then lastly, you need to have a dedicated team that is not just doing workshops and some design thinking stuff, because that's really like soda fizz innovation. It fizzles out. It is a sustained process. So we think looking at the value pools of what is going to change as a result of innovation or a merger, to the technology, is it really adaptable and scalable with legacy systems? And then lastly and importantly, are you really creating a solution that is solving a friction or a need that's really large and acute? Else it sounds like a band-aid solution. And that's why, as Florian was saying too, innovation is really hard at a sustained level. And we think that could be one of the ingredients that we've been trying to really push hard and walk through. All the way from the top, change behavior at the bottom, and making sure it's sustained sequence layered innovation.
Harnish, one more question. So under your roof in your portfolio, which is quite diverse, there are a lot of companies. So do you see yourself as an innovator as well, in that sense?
Yeah, I think, my job is to really take a team of clevers and make a clever team, as simple as that sounds. Like, I think that's kind of what's needed, multidisciplinary perspectives to make that innovation happen. But I would say, innovation can come in so different ways. So, for example, you could take all the operating data of just say what lies within the company and help them do better operations and re-engineer it, whether it's vegetation management, trying to do workforce deployment using live data capture. Second one could be about just reimagining the way you serve your customers and the total end-to-end journey, or a whole different way of giving them personalized services, almost taking a page from the B2C side and then making sure how it could be adapted for B2B. So that energy procurement and the way they pay the rates are very specific to a small or business owner versus a large one. And then lastly, I think it's also about doing things at an ecosystem level, where you're trying to merge not only your understanding of the industry and the data you have, but weather, for example, and assets that you operate. How can you do a combination of all of those things with your partners to really do more asset optimization, to elongate the longevity of your assets, and ultimately try to get new business models running, new ways of revenue streams.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
Florian, utilities have a lot of data that they might not even know that it could be valuable. You are a CCO of a company that knows well how the data can be opened up securely and GDPR compliant. Understandably, that's not your business model today, but what are your thoughts, and is it possible opening up the data and pushing the innovation forward, kind of creating that symbiosis of large corporations and startup? You mentioned yourself, you started it with a great energy program, which I was part of. So what's next?
Yeah, so, the question is, how do you unlock data and how do you let the data flow? And that's actually at the heart of what we actually do. So Intertrust Technologies around data virtualization, identity and access management, and providing secure execution environments so that data and analytics can meet in a way that is very trusted and secure. And I think security and trust are the main challenges. So if you listen to decision makers within utilities talk about data, then this topic always is of prime importance. And that has two reasons. Number one, if you look to the data from the assets, then especially on the grid side, that's like a critical piece of infrastructure. And there's data governance, there are regulations that you have to protect information around these assets in a special way. And then downstream, you have the retail business where you have to deal with customers and where you have to deal with GDPR and other privacy regulations. So you have a pretty well-defined and strict framework. And what we propose is to use some of the technologies that, you will not be surprised to hear it, we offer to unlock that. And, we have like a nice portfolio of utilities that were brave enough to try this out. Of course, in the beginning in safe environments, but we've left this stage and we are now able to virtualize, aggregate, and govern data that really comes from core systems of grid operations, of wind farms, and from customers' homes, with very large organizations that apply rigorous security reviews for our technology. So I think it's a cultural thing, it's a mentality thing, but it's also, are you using technology that can unlock the inherent value of the data in a way that is acceptable for chief security officers and also for boards that have a personal liability that nothing goes wrong with the data. And so, and that I think is also something that has shifted over the last few years. So the effort to do that today based on technologies like Intertrust has been developing is moderate. It's not, you need to have a huge upfront investment to try out things. So it's all safe and lean and cost efficient in the beginning. And that normally encourages people also to start doing something new. Yeah. If the upfront investment is very high and the outcome is uncertain, that's always difficult in a big organization, as we all know.
And maybe a second question to that. In your experience, companies like larger utilities, they initially started within their company to share that data in that way, or it's purely from the drive to open up the data for more innovation?
Well, I think it starts internally. So what you see is that often sharing data within the utility is harder than sharing it with external partners, which is, it's like strange because you would assume that, you know, people trust their colleagues maybe more than outsiders, but that's not always the case. And, you know, I think that has to do with the fact that people understand that data is power, influence. It's very valuable. So people try to keep and balance their position also internally. And so I think there's a job that needs to be done internally. Also, you know, it's an efficiency topic. I mean, you know, there are companies that, you know, can invest a lot of money in building new, beautiful data lakes. We believe that that's often not necessary anymore. You can save the money, do something more virtual with the same result. Yeah. And what's then the second challenge that you mentioned is how do you provision some of this data to external partners or to research? And I can tell you that also here in the Valley, a lot of universities or institutes are struggling with that. And well, you know, we offer them a solution with a secure execution environment that can do this job very, very easily. So that's also still, I would say, early days. But it's possible, and we've proven it is. So more to come.
Awesome. Harnish, during our call, we have discussed that we should be moving from fragmented data to web of value. How do you see this happening, and what would it take, especially in the world where everyone understands that a data is value, and basically hoarding it and have reflex to do that in large companies? Could you please provide some examples from your experience and maybe through portfolio companies, how these goals are being realized?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, the whole energy ecosystem as such, it's a very convoluted, you know, fragmented, you know, interlinked, so to say, of processes, and they usually think either you are an oil and gas or you are a power utility provider. But what we've noticed is it's more than just a value chain. You know, the linearly path is actually more of a complex web of people and ecosystem players who need to exchange value more. So considering, you know, energy transition and customer expectation on the other side, the end state is more that's going to become decentralized, more transparency, more decarbonized value chain, you know, where people really are forced to think about their assets and how you reduce that imprint. And that's also becoming a lot more digitalized. So decentralized, decarbonized, digitalized is definitely where things have been headed. What is required to help do that are, first of all, the notion, as Florian was saying, you need to have trust. And the way you help do trust is making sure you are trying to solve some common goals, right? Whether that's the startup trying to create a solution and the corporate that's trying to help fix that, are they looking at the same use cases and benefits? So that way, I think you can create a win-win-win with your customers, with your vendors. Number two is making sure that, you know, you are playing the long game. These are not quick fixes that will happen in 6 months like B2C. So trying to make sure the data you have, you know, how much of that is knowledge, how much of that is actionable insights. Even if you have actionable insights, who are the people who are actually going to deploy those solutions? And I think that deployment of a B2B solution internally or externally is kind of hard in this space. So you need to have people who really understand the space well. I think that's where founders and startup entrepreneurs who really understand the space well, you know, have been thriving. And then lastly, for the examples that you've talked about, I can talk about a few here. One of them in our portfolio is around the whole workforce deployment. right? Capturing the manual paperwork process in a digitalized fashion by using tools so that they can be more productive on the field. You know exactly where to send them. Same thing goes in with procuring energy and bringing transparency in the rates. So that's what we did with EnergyBot, for example, as a startup, where we are trying to sort of streamline the whole process and bring transparency on what rates they can get. And other one is called Utopia's Insights. This is a data science platform, primarily looking at Grid 3.0 to take the energy data, the data around the weather at a real-time micro level, and then the operational conditions of those assets to then really provide, recommended insights and better forecasting. Because if you can't forecast that demand, you would be looking at penalties plus regulations important. So these are just a few examples of how we look at the entire ecosystem and trying to create partnerships, both between corporates, startups, or internally within their operations.
Thanks, Harnish. Moving on, so maybe let's briefly talk about, starting with you, Florian. What are the missing links you feel, what are the missing links are in the current development cycle and innovation cycle? You have vast experience in that, so do you feel that something is still missing for companies and startups for innovation to move forward?
So I think there are two elements. First of all, what are, let's say, the cultural discrepancies. And I think we have to acknowledge the fact that this is going to be an evolution and not a revolution, also on the data side. So if I look back, when I came to the Valley in 2015, where the thinking on data and utility world was in 2015 versus today, then, in the tech industry, people would say, well, shifting the thinking, it took forever, or 5 years, a long time. But for utilities, that's not a long time. And I saw very significant progression. And, some of the products and services that, we have enabled and that we have developed and that we have deployed are a good example for that. So I think, utilities are on the right cultural journey to change the mindset and to open more up, considering to do more with data. The second part is actually the technology. And if you see where the technology stands today, so what it can do, also in a very cost-effective way, that's all available. So, if you are a utility and you have massive grid operations and you ask yourself, how can I extract more value from the data without investing either a huge amount of money or taking security risk? I mean, it's all there. Yeah. So we don't see any gaps from a technology standpoint. So it's more, moving the technology into the organizations, building use cases that people trust and that then other companies look into and also implement. I mean, that's the journey we are on. And some of the very, very big players around the world are making very bold moves also on the data side. So I'm very optimistic around the developments there, which is good for our business as well.
Yeah. Thanks. Harnish, what are your thoughts? What are the missing links?
Echoing kind of what Florian said, additionally, I would say three things. Firstly, a lot of companies are ambitious. Very few are courageous to actually, stay in for the long game. So really putting money in your mouth, sponsoring it with the notion that, innovation is hard and you will have to take some creative bets. Some things will fail, but at least it's a notion of learning. So the more you learn, the more you can really be ambitious in the future forecasting, making creative bets in your portfolio, and then providing the right sponsorship at the management level to go execute. I think that's really, really important. Number two is, again, looking at, technology as one piece, as an enabler, but it's really also about change management, right? Health solutions, if they're not easy to deploy, they're not, fulfilling, people will only use it for a few times and then realize you don't understand the way we operate. So change the ways you operate in a sustained behavior change way. It's important. And I think lastly is like just taking a look at where things are headed in terms of technologies and making sure they can be adapted and being modular and scalable with existing legacy infrastructure. That's going to be critical. And I think a combination of all of that three with lastly folks who are really passionate about making the change happen and making sure they don't get promoted in 2 years and they move to some other division and that ambition sort of goes away with the person. So really enabling a team of champions that can do that at scale in a sustained way. I think that's kind of what's needed both at the corporate operational efficiency level, but also for new businesses to be launched.
Thanks. So we have 1 minute left, and then maybe let's go to the last question for you both. Where do you see the 5 areas where new data-driven business models are emerging right now? Maybe you, Harnish.
Yeah.
Or Florian.
Go ahead, Florian.
Yeah, so first of all, the good news is we see them across the value chain. So we see them in renewable generation, we see them on the grid side, and we see them on the customer B2B and B2C side. Maybe where we see a lot of activity at the moment is around grid assets, so transmission and distribution. And I think this has to do with the fact that we are facing a transportation revolution. Electric vehicles are coming more and more, and of course this has very significant impact on the electrical system and also the infrastructure, so all the power lines. And more and more, and we see this with E.ON, which is like a huge DSO across Europe. People are scratching their head and thinking, okay, how's this going to work if we have like EV penetration rates from 20% or 30% or 40%, which if you walk around in Palo Alto, you already see today. Yeah. Is the grid going to hold up with this demand? And, where will people charge? And how do we find out where the hotspots are? So there are many questions, and we believe and we know that the answer for a lot of these questions is in the data. And this creates like a lot of opportunities also for startup ecosystems to come up with solutions that are valuable and that help utilities to plan better, plan more accurate, manage regulatory processes in a way, and also create new partnerships. So, for example, the utilities and car companies will be very close to each other in the future, given where the fuel for the cars will come from in the future. And so I think there's a very, very big space. And then also in the other spaces, upstream and downstream. We see a lot of stuff on operations and maintenance, insurance. So the whole business model actually becomes more and more data-driven and more digital. And that's where the opportunities are.
Harnish?
Cool. I'll just add my quick 5. If I go again with the themes of digitalization, decarbonization or decentralized, the first opportunity just is internal operations. How do you mitigate the overall impact and make your operations efficient? Number 2 is how do you reimagine the way you can serve your customers and provide more transparency to them, with new offerings. Number 3 is around making your assets more resilient for the long term, whether it's the oil and gas companies or energy and utility companies, making sure you are making the most from what you have. We are also then looking at how you can play offense and defense and create new product solutions, which people couldn't imagine, but if you can leverage assets well, you do that. The 4 is really about making sure you can do ecosystem partnerships. So as Florian was saying, it could be about taking metadata, geographic data, and then lastly is the energy sector has a lot of overlaps with other sectors. So if you can create those ecosystem partnerships, then you can really unlock more value. And I think those are what we have to think is beyond just a sector, and what are the other sectors that we can do partnerships with to really provide a seamless end-to-end experience. And those are the 5. I think.
Florian, Harnish, thank you for being with us today and waking up early in the morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, gentlemen, indeed, for devoting your early hours to us here at the Energy Tech Summit.